So my first area was Gijón in Spain, and it's a region sort of in the center of Spain, like up north, center north of Spain. Um, it's known as like Asturia, like it's the sort of like the not county or country, but like sort of like the area how it's split up in the northern area, because the northern area of Spain has little regions. So there's like Basque Country, was because the Basque people want to say that that's their country, and then in the middle area is Asturia, and then it goes to Gallegan, like Gallego and all that stuff. So it was all it was all like a brand new experience for me. So I knew Spanish because I like my parents spoke Spanish, but I didn't tend to speak it very often until I actually joined the church because we went to church. It was a Spanish speaking church, so I got to practice up my Spanish, and so being there for the first time, like I'm like, okay, I know Spanish. I can talk to the people here. And I remember the first time we stopped somebody, they start talking to me, and I don't know what they're saying for some reason, because Spanish from Spain is a bit different. The dialect or the not the dialect so much, but the accent is completely different from what I was used to, and it sort of like threw me back a little bit. I'm like, they're speaking really fast. They're speaking differently, and I don't know what to say and how to respond, and I'm just like nodding my head. And so that's how it was for like probably like a day or two, and then finally I'm like, okay, I get what they're saying, and now I want to be able to talk to them. And it was always interesting because being at home, like I was always told like your Spanish has an accent, but then being on the mission, like when the people in Spain would talk to me, they're like, oh, you speak Spanish really well, and I'm like, oh, thanks. um, and then I think the first person I stopped was like right off the train. Like my companion's like, all right, let's put our stuff down. Let's go get some groceries, and I want you to stop somebody. And I was like, okay. And I'm like, well, can I see how it's done first? And so he does it, and I'm like, just like in awe, and I'm like, oh, whoa, lots of words were said. I don't know what's going on, even though I should know this language. And then I tried, and then they're like, go away. And I'm just like, am I supposed to follow them, or am I supposed to just give up, or what's going on? And so I had to get used to like, getting rejected. It's like when I think back to it, like it is sort of weird to get stopped on the street, but I mean that's what we were doing. We're talking to people on the street, just saying hi. Let me introduce myself. You just talk to them and just start a conversation out of the blue, and so that was a whole new experience because when you're at home, like if you start a conversation, you're usually in the same place, you're sitting down, it's a coworker or it's somebody in the classroom. But yeah, in the mission, it was people you've never seen in your life before, walking somewhere or waiting for the bus or whatever, and you're about to enter their lives for the first time and say, hey, do you want to know about the church? And so yeah, that was really interesting and but fun. As Americans, we tend to be like, oh, Spanish, so it's Spanish culture. But if you say Spanish culture, you're only referring to Spain. Like Spain is like the Spanish people are from Spain. It's Spanish culture, and it's basically it's European. And then if you're referring to like Hispanic culture, you're referring to basically everything that lies in the Americas and goes all the way down. And one fact that somebody brought up to me once was I think it was my brother-in-law when he was saying he's serving in Chile, and he was saying like if you say you're from North America, they get upset because they're like, what do you mean North America? Like this is all the Americas. Like they don't see it as South America, Central America, North America. Like people from Central America and South America see it as that we live in the Americas. So I always thought that was interesting. But yeah, when referring to Spanish culture, you're only talking about Spain. And Spain is really, when you look at it, it's really small. Like, Spain can fit inside the United States, things like that. But yeah, Spanish culture is Spain. So in a lot of the areas I was in, there were cities, so everything was all apartments. Like it felt like everything was just apartments because we're cities, and that's how everything was at. But then if you went out into the countryside, then you'd find homes and things of that nature, and every now and then we'd find people out in the mountainsides. Like there's just one little shack up in the mountains, and that's where someone lives, and there'll be like little shacks everywhere, and those people tended to not speak Spanish. Sometimes they would speak a dialect, and so that was really interesting because it's like, well, we're not sure we can communicate with you, but then had to find members that could communicate with them, or find ways to visit them, because then we're like, there's a house up there, how do we get up there? Like, what trails are we taking, and can we go up there? But yeah, I felt most of everything was always built, in apartments. And if there were people who had homes, like with a yard or anything, it was really small. But it always seemed like they were a lot wealthier to have a home that, just 1-story house and things like that. So that was sort of new to me, like to see that, because I'm used to suburban neighborhoods and a few apartments here and there, but everything is like we always lived in an apartment, things like that. So in Bilbao, when I served there, was, I believe it was during the summer, and just become a zone leader. So it was fun. I was like, Bilbao and zone leader, way cool. The weather was great. So it was the summer, so everything was just fine. It was by a coastline a bit, but of course, never can get near that area. I don't think it was a coastline. Actually, it was more like there was like a river that ran through that whole thing, so it was pretty big. Trying to think back to it, but the weather was great. In my last area was very close to Bilbao, still the same zone, and I experienced like every single season within the span of 4 months for some reason. Like when I got there, and it snowed for a bit, and then it got really sunny, and then it started going into fall, and it felt like every single season. But the best way I describe the northern area of Spain, like their weather was very similar to California. Like just up north in California, it's really cold, and it's winter a lot, or when it gets to winter seasons. But then you go down more, and it's nice 75 degrees. So that's what I felt like the weather was there. Like there was some parts that were humid than others, but I was always pretty comfortable. There was some rainstorms here and there, but we had our nice trench coats, and wearing those though, like it threw people off. They always thought we were like FBI or something, and we're like, no, we're just trying to talk to you about something that's good for you. But yeah, so that's how the weather was. Pamplona is where the Running of the Bulls takes place, and that was one of our areas. And I didn't serve there, but the missionaries that were in my district or in my zone like did serve there. So whenever that would happen, most people don't know that holiday is actually an entire week, that sometimes bleeds into before and the after. And what happens is that nowadays, when I was out there, like they would remove the missionaries from there and they would send them somewhere else. So I remember the missionaries that were in that area got sent to my area, and so that made it for a very busy apartment. And something unique in Spain was that apartments were known as pisos, which in a way it translates to a flat. So I guess people from England tend to call apartments flats. So in Spain they were called pisos, which is floor really. But yeah. So yeah, the missionaries would get pulled out of Pamplona, and because what happens during that festival, it's not just the Running of the Bulls that takes place. It's everyone parties and drinks all day, every day, and it gets too crazy, and the streets get really messed up and dirty. And I remember afterwards we did go into the area, like after a few days that had passed, and like there's just trash everywhere. It gets insane, and you see cleanup crews working all over the place to get it back to normal. And one thing that was really awesome was Spain tends to do this thing called like bridging of holidays, and this is something I wish that we would adapt here in the States. So let's say a holiday falls on a Thursday, and then there's another holiday on a Tuesday. So what happens is that your Monday and Friday become holidays as well. So then you have Thursday, Friday, then you have your Saturday and Sunday and Monday, and then Tuesday off. So like whenever that would happen, so if there's a holiday that falls on a Thursday and you have the weekend, like it just bridges over and it takes away your Friday, so you don't go to work. So a lot of people that would meet on the streets, or you would think that people would be working, they're like, oh no, it's a holiday. And we would ask, well, what holiday? And they're like, it's Saint someone. And we're like, oh, okay. Like, so there was lots of Catholic holidays for different saints, and most people didn't really know what they were. So I always found the Spanish people to be very curious, um, especially like in Spain. There's a lot of the older, like a very high senior citizen population, and so they would sort of keep to themselves, but they were very curious about things. Like we would always see them in the park, and I remember like seeing like they would just like sort of like investigate things or be curious about things. I remember one time there was like a broken bottle on the ground, and there was just a bunch of like senior citizen, these guys just like staring at it and just discussing about it, how it got there, and so forth, and just like, I don't know, I guess that's how they were passing the time. They would also play games in the park, like chess, or what we would call petanca, which most people call, I forget what people call it here. But it's like the little ball, you throw it, and then you have these bigger balls that you have to throw and get closer to it. I forget what that's called. But yeah, in Spain, they would play that game a lot in the park, and it was like with like really heavy metal balls or horseshoes and things like that. Spain has a lot of parks. Like every single city had a park and had plazas, and you would get around mostly by just walking. And what was always nice is that everything's cobblestoned, and you get to see like the old world. It was always a very unique experience to me. And the thing that I always noticed about the Spanish people, and that I ended up loving about it, was that they were reserved, but then once you like got into their space and into their circle, like they were like your best friends for life. Like at first, like they would not want anything to do with you, but then if you hit off on a topic that they agreed on, or if like that touched home for them, they're like you were buddy, and then they would just like grab you and like hug you and like just like grab the back of your neck and squeeze it, and they're like yeah, and like be very touchy. But at first, it's like I was sort of like, don't come to my door, don't touch me or anything. But then if you said something that made them laugh or just, spark curiosity, then like you and this person you never met before are best friends. and there was times where like it was like you want to come in to eat, and it's like okay, like, and we just knocked on the stranger's door, but they're like we're about to eat, you guys look like great guys, come in and have some supper with us. And it's like okay. Or yeah, like it was always really interesting to see that, like to see how I felt it was like that throughout the whole northern area, because I got to serve from both sides and the whole mission. And so I served like in 7 different areas, so I got to experience that everywhere. It was like everywhere we went, like they would become your best friend. So it was great. And they weren't always members. They were people we just met on the street, and so that was always a fun experience to see that. One thing, here's a big comparison with the culture. Like the teenagers would tend to be scared of us. Like if they would try to talk to us in English, and they would say, "How are you doing?" or something like that, or like they would try to say a few English phrases, and if we try to talk to them, they'd sort of like laugh and like run away, and it was sort of weird, because then we would see them sometimes act really tough, and so then if we'd confront them about it, we're like, "Oh hey, like what are you talking about?" They would just sort of like run away, or like just like keep quiet and not say anything anymore, and it was sort of funny. I don't know why, but that was something I never understood. Even asking some of the members who were kids there, like Like we would sort of ask them, like, why did the other kids like run away? And they're like, oh, I don't know. Like, yeah. Places that I got to visit were some castles, but I don't remember where those castles are located. But I mean, if you go to Spain, you could just ask anyone where there's a castle and they'll point you in the right direction. But in Bilbao, there's the Guggenheim Museum, and so that was really awesome to go check that out because there's a couple of Guggenheims around the world, but that's the one in Spain. And the one in Spain had outside, they had what was known as the puppy, which is a giant puppy made out of flowers. And the really unique thing about Spain is that every city tended to have art pieces just in random places, be it in parks or just in some plaza or wherever. There was always like a random art sculpture, and they were really weird art sculptures. Sometimes it was just like a piece of metal that like had something sticking out of it, and that was it. Or sometimes there were like these marble looking sculptures of this like giant dog or a giant lady or a sumo wrestler looking thing. So they always had interesting art pieces all scattered all over different cities, and those were always fun, pictures to take as a missionary. If we found a place like a McDonald's or a Burger King, and I think a KFC is what we found there, and a Subway. If we found any of those things in our area, like as missionaries, we would then congregate there for a while and take it over. And it was interesting to see like the things that they would serve there compared to what we were used to here in the States. Like Subway would have certain things that they don't have here. I don't know if I can remember all of them, but of course the biggest one that always threw me off was how McDonald's would serve beer, and it's like, oh, that's interesting. Like, like you still see kids and everybody in there, like, and it's like you think it's a family establishment, and it still was, but yeah, they had alcohol as part of what you can get with your value meals and whatnot. And so I always found that really interesting. And of course, then you have the metric system. So then you don't have a quarter pounder with cheese; you have something else. Oh, so in Spain, there's a lot of things that on Sunday, a lot of things close because they're still a very religious country. So a lot of the places would close down, and but the only place that wouldn't close down would be the bakeries. So everyone could still get bread. And then would be the bars. But the bars there aren't similar to the ones here in the States. Like here in the States, I guess most bars are like sports bars. Like people drink, watch sports, and that's about the extent. Or maybe some places they have where you can dance. In Spain, a lot of the bars there were very, I guess, like people would bring their family in there, and you can eat a meal and sit at the bar, and like they would be open way late into the night, and sometimes we'd see like kids still up and about, and it's like, this is sort of different. I mean, they're still watching sports games, but you could eat a full dinner and everything, have all sorts of meals there and whatnot. And, we'd stay away from that, but then every now and then an investigator would be like, well, come in and I'll feed you something. And when we would accept, it would just be really awkward because it's like, this is still a bar essentially, because there's the bartender and there's all the stuff you have there, but okay. So that was always interesting. And then of course, seeing bakeries in every corner was awesome, because then that's when we would start getting to enjoy the pastries that Spain had to offer, which and then one of those pastries, which I think every missionary would get like almost every day, was known as the Napolitana. And what that is basically a like a croissant that's sort of rectangular, that has like a strip of chocolate inside of it. So it's like a chocolate filled croissant, but and it's like sort of flaky when you bite into it, and it's delicious. And there's something very similar to it that can be found in Target, which I've told other return missionaries from Spain to go to Target and raid their bakery area or their pastry area, because it's very similar to it. But yeah, I think that's a lot of the comparisons. Like, it's the old world. You see cobblestone, you see the old structures, and every now and then while we're out working, like, you just had to stop and just look around and take it in and realize you're you're in Europe, you're in the old world. Like, things happen here. There's a tremendous history, and preparation days. We go to visit castles and things like that, and just sort of imagine like what it was like during those eras, and like when the whole Enlightenment happened, or when the whole the apostasy type of stuff happened. And so yeah, those were some great experiences. Some different culture shocks as well. Seeing that. So the Spanish I grew up with was from Mexico, and like I had lived in Mexico for a little bit, and though I always felt like my own Spanish, that as I sort of relearned it in my teenage years, like it wasn't, it became its own accent. It didn't really stay with the Mexican accent, because Mexican Spanish tends to extend their vowels at the end. I don't know what the great example of that is, but I remember being called out in my Spanish class at BYU and saying, "Oh yeah, you're from Mexico, or you have Mexican heritage, so you extend your vowels." And I'm like, "No, I don't, but okay." But in Spain, a big difference is always the Z, which is known as the theta. So in Spanish, in Mexico Spanish, you would just, the Z just sounds like an S. It's just, so there's no change there. So CH, CI, and Z all go sh. Just so, like, if you're saying civilization, it'd be civilización. Just all the S sounds very harsh. But then in Spain, in Castellano, how it's supposed to be said in Spanish, it's civilization would be civilización. So it's very, some people try to like poke fun of it as sort of like a lisp, but then it makes it a lot easier to write, because then you know where a Z or a CI or CE is supposed to go. Then, because in Spanish in Mexico, you don't know where any of that goes. You just have to sort of memorize it. So it helps grammatically and writing and things like that. Another big example, when you say heart or corazón, it would just be like that in Mexican Spanish, but then in Spain it'd be corazón. So, and it was one thing that was interesting about that was when I would sing hymns, if I just sang them regular, like in my own Spanish, like I would stand out while everyone else is very soft with what they're saying. So whenever I would speak, I would just speak. I wouldn't do the theta or anything like that, just because I wasn't used to it and I didn't want to have to sort of force myself into doing it. But when I would sing hymns, I would, and it was a lot easier because I could see it in the page. I'm like, oh, so here's where the letters come up or that way. So now I have to make that TH sound and sing with it, and it's fine. And I think I still do sing my Spanish hymns with a theta, just because it sounds smoother sometimes. So that, I think that's like the biggest difference. Other than that, I did notice companions, as they were learning, they would make some of their sounds a lot harder, like the J. A J is supposed to be very, like in Spain, I think it is a lot harsher, but sometimes they would exaggerate it a bit. So like in Gijón, they would be like Gijón, like they would like sort of guttle the sound a little bit. And I would notice that some like people from Spain would do that a little bit too. But yeah, my Spanish is still unique to me. But it was always nice to hear the compliment. They're like, "Oh, your accent's great." I'm like, "Oh, cool. Yeah, I feel special," since I always felt that I had, like, my accent wasn't all that great. But yeah, we always did meet a lot of Muslim people there. There was mosques, and so that was always interesting, because there was a bit of history between Spaniards and Muslims and things like that, because of, I guess, the Crusades and that type of history, which I didn't know too much about. But then, speaking with Muslims, it was always a new experience, because it's like, yeah, we want to talk about Jesus Christ, but you see him as a prophet, and that's it. And how do what angle? I guess not angle, but how do we share a message? But yeah, they were always really nice, and a lot of the things they would always talk about with their religion. They're like, we don't smoke or drink and do those types of things. They're like, oh yeah, like we don't do that either. Like we can relate on that aspect, and so that's a lot of what I saw. Oh, also in Spain, there's a lot of people from Africa, from Ghana and Nigeria, and so there was still sort of a melting pot there, that the same that you would see in America in a way, like a lot of people from different cultures and countries like starting to raise their family there, and I always found that interesting too, because it's like, whoa, you're from Ghana but you speak Spanish, or you're from Nigeria and you speak Spanish, and or like you're Muslim and from Morocco or wherever, and you're speaking Spanish to us, and that would blow my mind. And there was times where we would have to teach in a different language by getting them a Book of Mormon in their language, and then following along with our Spanish one or our English one, and just like trying to say, all right, read this passage, because like numbers don't change too much, so we can be like, okay, like that's a verse, and that's where we're on. That's the same verse we're on, so let's do this. So those were fun experiences. For me, like people would always remind me, like, well, you gained a testimony. You read the Book of Mormon. And when you share it, it's powerful. Like I always felt like a convert's testimony tended to be very powerful, because they had to go through certain changes, like that were sometimes really drastic. There was a full 180 a lot of times for some people, and I felt like it was like that for me. Like I had to completely change, and to be in the church and to have my testimony grow. And so I feel like allowing converts to continue sharing their testimony, and then listening to what it was like for them, like helps them remember and feel those spiritual moments again. Because every time I share my experience, and then even my family's experience, like that was one of my most powerful tools that I would use in the mission, was sort of saying, well, my parents, I can share that story. Like my parents, they sat in sacrament meeting, and right afterwards they looked at each other and like, this is where we want to stay. And then they went to someone in the hall, and they're like, hey, how do we get baptized to become members? And like one elder, like my dad tells us, like one elder, like all of a sudden like flipped around, and he's like, can we come visit you today? And all this stuff. And yeah. And then from there, like they would use our family to be at all the other, like, lessons with other investigators and things like that, so we can share our testimonies and express how our life had changed. So I think, yeah, just having a convert relive their conversion over and over again always helpful. So in one area, I remember we talked to this guy, and he was really interested in the church, and he liked it. And then we'd ask questions, like, well, what time you guys going to bed, or how much are you guys living off of? Because he was curious that, these 19-year-olds are out there doing this, wearing suits and things like that. And then, so we taught him, and then he was happy and everything. And like, we would just meet on the street and discuss there. And we came back for a second visit to talk to him, like on a park bench. And I was showing him the prophets of the church and the general authorities and everything. And then, because like, oh, these men look very genuine, very real, and they look very sincere, and I can tell they have like a really good spirit to them and things like that. And he's like, but I don't know if I can do what you guys do, like you guys are doing this all the time. And like, we were sort of confused for a bit of what he was saying, but apparently we sort of realized that he thought that, like, as a member of the church, you had to live the missionary lifestyle, like you had to be in bed at a certain time, or like go and report in and like live off a certain amount of money, and you only had one day to prepare for things. Because when I remember he would invite us to things, and it's like, oh no, we can't do it. We could do it on this day because that's our preparation day, and things like that. And so that's what he thought. And then once we realized that, we're like, wait, like, as a member of the church, you're not always living this way. This is what we live. We live this way because we're missionaries, and we have to, be a certain way to get our work done and share the gospel. And And then he was like, "Oh, really?" Like it was the funniest thing ever, because like we were so confused as to what his, like, objection was to learn more, and like he just felt like, oh, I can't have one day that's where I can have fun, and then the rest of the days I'm out preaching the gospel. Um, but yeah, once you realize that, we figured out the confusion and explained that to him, he was like, okay, that's great. And like we left him with an ensign to continue reading and things like that. But then he still was like, well, I'll just keep learning more about you guys and on my own and things like that. But he was a great guy, but it was super funny for us. We're like, oh man, like how did that happen? Like, we're very confused about how that happened. So something I've been reflecting on for a while now is the experience and the knowledge and skills you gain on your mission. You gain leadership experience, and you gain experience that you can use as a manager and as a director, or as any job that you would get. You will gain those skills and abilities on your mission. You'll learn how to talk to people. You'll learn how to resolve conflicts because of missionary companions and whatnot. You'll learn how to commit people to doing things. You'll learn how to follow up with people, how to keep your appointments, how to manage your time. And these are all the soft skills and important skills that you will use as you go forward in a career one day. The mission shows you all these things, and just throws you in the fire and lets you learn them. And if you start to look at it this way, like going to church, not only are you gaining spiritual knowledge, but you also learn skills of how to teach people, how to instruct, how to organize a classroom, how to be a leader, be an example. And in a way, Sunday in church, your 3 hours that you're there, you gain spiritual nourishment. You're gaining, renewing your covenants, but you're also gaining skills that you can take to work, that you can take to your community, that you can take to be a leader in your community or wherever you are. And those are things that I learned while on the mission and while attending church. It's school. It's education, and it's opportunity to gain all those things every Sunday. And then as you will serve a mission for 2 years, you'll just be in an immense training to one day be like our Heavenly Father, to have those traits and abilities that He has. And yeah, that's something that I reflected on, and I know is true. And you'll be able to experience it yourself. During that time, my dad was trying to find some way to bring our family together. And so we used to be Catholic, and so he's like, well, let's go to a Catholic church, see what that's like again. And I was like, no. It didn't really work out. And then so he was sort of like church hopping, going to different churches, taking the family there on Sundays. And after a while, I was like, I'm a teenager, I got my own thing going on. But seeing them actually change once they went to the church, to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, once they were there, there was a complete change in everything that they did. And then when I started attending for a while, like I sort of had social anxiety to be around people. But then like the kids in my mutual and in Sunday school, like they started to warm up to me and talk to me, and they became my friends there, and it was nice, because then it was, I have some friends here that are helping me out to not feel so awkward or feel weird of what's going on. Because my first visit to church, I sat in sacrament, started feeling really anxious, and I just stayed outside. And I didn't know that the meetings were 3 hours long, so I stayed outside the entire time, just walking around the church, trying to find something to do. And then I remember one of the elders came to me and he's like, I want to give you this book. And it was the Book of Mormon. He had wrote his testimony inside, and I still have that book, and that's the main one I used to study my scriptures with. And like reading that for the first time was impactful. Like, it was this testimony, and I was like, well, this is weird. At first I'm like, oh, a book, awesome. And I didn't know what it was all about, but then reading his testimony was impactful, and just seeing all those little bits and pieces just come together like how the church was organized, that it made sense. Like it held to some of the views that I believed that I didn't see in other churches, like things that, God is, as a body of flesh and bone, things like that. I always imagined and pictured, and it all made sense to me. And that, if Christ was going to have his church on earth, he would lead it, and there'd be prophets. Like if there's prophets then, why wouldn't there be prophets now? And hearing all that, all of it just made my testimony grow. And then personally doing my own studying and everything, the Spirit would confirm to me multiple times that it was true. What I was hearing, what I was seeing, what I was experiencing. So one of the biggest spiritual experiences I had on mission was in my second area. There was a family there that every missionary tried to visit, and they were actually members, but they had been inactive for a long time. They're actually from Argentina, and while they were active, they were doing great, but then all of a sudden they stopped coming, and had been, I think, like over a year or so. And so every missionary tried, but then the mom would sort of dodge them or say yes, and then nothing would happen. And it's finally I did set up a visit with them, and we went there, and we waited past the time, and then she showed up. It's like, we're gonna wait here till she shows up. And so she showed up, and we go into the elevator to go up to her house, and because her husband and like her son-in-law were gonna be there, because we got the visit because her son-in-law had just come from Argentina, and he wanted the family to go back to church and things like that. And as soon as we get in the elevator, she drops her keys and they fall through the slot. And so we can't get in the house now. But luckily she's like, oh, my daughter is around the corner. We can get the keys from her. She has spare. So we're like, okay. And so then we make it inside the house, and that was like, all right, we were inside the house for the first time, and no one's ever been able to do this. So we're like really excited, and we're talking to the son-in-law, and we're excited about that because he was very active, and he wanted his family to come back to church and things like that. And then the husband comes in, patriarch of the house, and he's there, and then we're all talking and just getting to know their story and things like that. And then finally, I decided, what, let's share a message with you before we go. And we decided to read Enos, and she gets to the last verse of it. And in the last verse, Enos talks about the time that we all get to be together, and that he'll be there in front of us, and sort of in front of the Savior, and we'll be in our mansions above and things like that. And that verse was as she was reading that verse, all of a sudden you just felt something come down on the room, and then she finished it, and then we're all in tears, something just had just sort of just came and sat there. Everyone was in tears, and then I bore my testimony, and I invited them to come to church, which was the very next day, but for a while we just sat in sort of silence and just just feeling joy, and just in tears, and it was something I had never experienced before, and it was intense. You just felt something was in the room with us, and everyone just was smiling. The husband was like, you guys got to come more often and things like that, and it was sort of I don't know, for so long the Spirit hadn't been there, and then all of a sudden it decided to show up and just hit everyone really hard. And I remember my companion turning to me, and he's like, you just dropped a spiritual bomb in there, Elder. He's like, I don't know if I my whole mission I've been here, if I ever felt that. And I was like, is that not normal? And then it was great to see them. They came to church, and and they started to progress a bit. But that experience was immense, and I never forget it. And even now when I go to that last verse of Enos, I could feel that power that verse has. And I remember the mom talking about how like I want to go back to the temple. I want my kids to have those blessings and things like that, because I know I made those covenants, and so that verse really touched her and everyone in that room. So it was amazing. First of all, congratulations on getting your mission call, and it's Spain. Just know that the Spanish people are wonderful people, and once you get to know them, and once they get to know you, they'll become your best friends. Um, Spanish people love Jesus Christ. They do. Um, while they're there, they are searching for the truth. As I taught in every area that I went to and served the people there, I gotta feel their love and their charity towards the Savior. And at the same time, I gotta feel some of their pain of not having the truth in their lives, and having the gospel, and having a way to bring their family together, because there are people that love families. They love friendships and having that relationship, and that's something that the gospel of Jesus Christ gives to everyone, and that's something that you'll be able to give to them. They'll be able to see it through you, and it'll be a wonderful experience. And as you teach the people there, and as you testify of Jesus Christ and Joseph Smith and the restored gospel of Jesus Christ, every now and then take the time to just stop and look around and see where you're at, and see that you're in Spain, and look at the people and see how they react, and see how they go about their days, and know that they're your brothers and sisters, and that what you have for them is going to change their lives, and it's going to make it better. That's the experience that I had every day, even on the days that were really hard, and just from walking all over the place, and just from being rejected so many times, you'll find people who will say yes, they want to hear from you, or just sit there and listen to you, and all of a sudden you'll see something happen to them, that they'll realize that with the questions that they had and they needed answers to, that you have them, and you're just a young lad or a young woman, and all of a sudden you have something that they need, and they can be of any age, and it'll be amazing. And just sharing what you know is true, sharing that that Jesus Christ is the Savior, and that He died for our sins, and that He loves us. Sharing that alone, and just letting them know that God lives, and that He loves them, and He loves all His children, and that's why you're there. You're there to serve the people there in Spain. You're there to serve the Spanish people, and letting them know those things, they'll listen to you. I know when I had to stop people, if I could start off even with just my testimony of telling them, like, hey, God lives, they would stop them in their tracks, and they'd sort of be confused, but then you'll be able to, they'd see your smile, and they'd feel your spirit, and they'll listen. And that's the experiences that I had and felt daily, and you will too. And I share these things with you in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.